Hello, students. I hope you're all well. I wanted to take a moment to talk to you about one of the most important parts of Chapter One, and that is the six eras in the history of business. I did a write up announcement last week, but just wanted to spend a little bit more time with it, especially as we are experiencing something personally, economically, that we have never seen before, not in my lifetime. I have a friend who has a 92-year-old mother, not in her lifetime. And so I just want to take a look back together for a moment if we could. So let's talk about the six eras in the history of business. So I'm going to start with the colonial period. And this was the period up to 1776. And it focused, we had small towns throughout this country, little villages, if you will. There weren't many paved roads. You pretty much uh, grew what you needed or caught or traded. So barter was a big thing. The economy was small because it was based on the output of farms and the ability to ship goods from one place to the other was difficult. And so even if you could make a desk, it might take you 2 weeks to make it. And if everybody in your town had it now and they didn't need any more, to get to the next village was a daunting task with your supply of desks to sell. The most people farmed, and there's a natural cycle to that. And you think about families working together on farms, inside, outside the house. And if you've ever planted anything, there's periods of lull and then great activity, and that's how that worked. So we were a fairly small economy at that point. Went from that to the Industrial Revolution. And that is much more in the 1800s. Now, it had been going in Europe for a solid 100 plus years by then, but here in the United States, that was not the case. And we decided to go into mass production, which means you have a factory and you need lots of people to come and work there, which is the beginning of big cities. And what you have is then the emphasis on creating, instead of it taking 2 weeks to make that desk, now you make 200 desks in 2 weeks. And so lots of people flock to the city. It's the beginning of what we think of as, the current work world where mom and dad or one goes off to work in the morning, comes home in the evening, and it's pretty consistent throughout the year. And so that was the Industrial Revolution. Now, that really took off when something major happened, and that was the advent of the railroad. And the railroad in the mid 1800s allowed everything to, because you can make those 200 desks, but you're still limited in where you can get them out to. So once we had the railroad, everything changed because now we can get to all four corners of the US. And that's a time where you see what is known as the industrial entrepreneurs period. Some people call them robber barons. You've heard of them. People like Vanderbilt or Rockefeller or Carnegie. And you may have heard of them because of Rockefeller Center or Carnegie Hall. But they made, in a generation, they became billionaires, which was unheard of. And they were innovators, as well as people that thrived in particular, took over particular industries. Carnegie was known for steel, Rockefeller for oil, Eli Whitney, the cotton gin. JP Morgan at one time had more money than the United States Treasury. Think about that for a moment. We had to borrow from him to stay afloat, and so on. And they did, while they were vastly wealthy, they also did a lot for charity, which is how you have Rockefeller Center. Carnegie created the whole library system as we know it today. Ben Franklin created the idea, but the actual system was funded through Carnegie endowments. And from there, and it's interesting because you will see that in the turn of the centuries, there's a lot of chaos and trust busting. And so in the turn of the century, with the industrial entrepreneurs, you also saw, lawsuits. It's like, for instance, Rockefeller, just Standard Oil was broken up because it was about to become a monopoly. And in a monopoly, that doesn't work in a capitalistic system because you need competition and choice that's the best thing for the economy and the consumers. If one person, one company controls everything, they have no reason to make it better, to innovate, and they can do whatever they want. They can charge whatever they want. So it's just, it makes a economy stagnant to have that. So they, in the turn of around the 2000s, we also engaged in some trust busting with Microsoft and lawsuits against them. So we seem to get this conglomeration of power around the turn of the century and kind of have to step in. So let's talk about the production era. One of my favorite quotes comes out of this era, and it is by Henry Ford, and it's, "You can have any color car you want as long as it's black." Well, what does he mean by that? He means that the black car is the most efficient to produce, so that's what we're going to produce. And the assembly line, the idea about equipment and efficiency in production were key, and they were king. And the individual employee was unimportant. They just thought of them as interchangeable. They thought machinery was where it was all at. And so I share that with you because the idea that you will take any color car because that's all there is and that's what they're producing is, in fact, fundamental to the way the production era worked. People did not have a lot of money. The middle class was small. And so he wanted everybody to be able to afford a car. And that was the thinking. Now, there were other car manufacturers as well. It wasn't like there was no competition, but Henry Ford was kind of the king of the production era in terms of really focusing on efficiency and getting cars down to a price where the average person could afford them. We go from that to the marketing era. Now, I want to preface this a little bit by saying a couple things happened. You had 2 world wars in the span of 30 years. I mean, just think about that for a moment, with millions and millions dead throughout the world. After the end of World War I, we said to the Germans, the world said, you've been bad. So Germany, not only do you have to look at all you've destroyed, not only do you have to pay people back, other countries, but we're not going to allow you, you have to make reparations, and we're not going to allow you to do certain things. And in the midst of their country was already destroyed, they were already a broken people, and it was allowed for the advent of Hitler. And he basically said to them, who's the world to tell us what to do? We're a proud people. We will do what we want, and we can rebuild and so forth. So that leads to World War II eventually. And in World War I, there is a feeling after that we'll never do this again, and we create the League of Nations, which precedes the UN. Obviously, they weren't effective since we had a second world war within 30 years. So the idea of, at the end of World War II, the war is fought primarily in Europe and Asia. And by the way, the United States did not come into it till quite late. And at that point, we realize that in fact, there is a different way to do this. And for the first time in history, something unique is done. Typically, whoever wins the war, whatever conflict, you can go back thousands of years in history. And what you will find is the victor takes all the spoils, or takes over a country, maybe even enslaves those people. In the case of World War I, we said, oh, you're going to pay everybody back, Germany, and you're not allowed to have arms and so forth. And so in World War II, instead, what we said is, guess what, Germany and Japan? We are going to rebuild you. And you have to do, as long as you do certain things. Japan, your emperor is not a god. And Germany, you're going to have to change your governmental system, and we will help you rebuild. And that was a very smart move, because at the end of the day, there are now 2 of the leading economies. In fact, in Europe, Germany is the leading economy, and they are 2 of our biggest trading partners. But at the time, it seemed crazy that people who had been our enemies and destroying us and torturing our people would suddenly now we would become, we would be helping them to rebuild. And think about it, we were the only ones left standing since the war had been fought in other places. That leaves the marketing era. In the production era, you don't have much money. In the marketing era, you got money because everybody's working. Everybody's back from the war, and you've got the beginning of the baby boom generation. And at that point, people want to consume. And now they don't necessarily want a black car. They want maybe a blue car or a red car. So it's the beginning of really thinking about what do people want, and let's make something for them. It's thinking about the consumer, and we go into very much of a selling era, which is, all about sales and getting people to buy. And we're not worried if they like it after the fact, as long as we got the sale. Well, that eventually leads to people being unhappy with that. And the overconsumption. And we enter the relationship era. And in the relationship era, we are focused on keeping customer loyalty because we know it matters. Cars, for instance, they used to make so much money on selling you a car, and they didn't care if you were unhappy 20 minutes after you walked off the lot, as long as you walked off the lot in the car. Well, now, that's not where they make the money. We know what cars cost. We can get what the dealership paid for the car. So now they have to make their money on service. So in the sales end, they've got to make sure you're happy, so you'll continue to come back to them, so you refer to them, and you will continue to do your service through them, because that's how they make the money. So more and more, when you go on Amazon and they already know what you like and they've got ideas for you. And at this point, this is all getting a little creepy, but the idea of the relationship era is that we are managing relationships long-term and ongoing at every level, not just a one-time mentality. I'm going to take you now to one second. Okay. So I'm going to take you back here. And the very last one, it wasn't on that last piece, is the social era. And the social era is what we're in now, which is the social media, which is that so much of what we consume and the way we interact with each other is now done on these platforms like Twitter, which in a way I think has been the worst thing for our society, but personal note aside, and things can blow up and go viral, as you will say, very, very quickly. And companies have had to adapt to that, because these are new ways for business and consumers to communicate and purchase even. So this is the era we're in now. And as this crisis has hit seemingly out of nowhere within just a couple of months, and I've, again, never seen anything like this, I posted an article for you to take a look at. And what I want you to think about is, what's next? This is a transformative time. Where are we headed next? What do you see for the future?